The first hand closed around his arm before he even understood what he had done wrong, and the second followed a heartbeat later, firm and practiced, pulling him away as his daughter's small fingers slipped from his grasp. In the bright, echoing hall flooded with daylight, panic surged through him faster than reason, because losing her grip felt like losing the last thing anchoring him to the world. Armin Halevi had not planned to stand out. He had worn his only clean jacket, the gray one with a frayed cuff he kept telling himself he would fix, and he had rehearsed quiet steps and lowered eyes the entire bus ride there. The building itself rose pale and imposing against a blue afternoon sky, banners shifting lazily in the breeze outside, sunlight reflecting off tall windows like watchful eyes. Inside, polished floors gleamed, and uniforms moved with synchronized precision. Armin knew instantly that someone like him did not belong in a place that smelled of fresh polish and authority. He was there for his daughter, and that was the only reason he had found the courage to walk through the doors. Mireia clung to his hand, her small face already flushed with the strain of standing too still for too long. She was 7, too young to understand why her father's shoulders always stayed tense in public spaces, why his eyes constantly scanned for exits, or why he held her hand like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. She only knew that this building was big and bright and full of strangers who looked important, and that her father had promised it would be all right. When the security officers approached, their expressions unreadable but their movements decisive, Mireia's eyes widened in confusion that cut Armin deeper than fear ever could. He felt the old, familiar weight pressed down on his chest, the one that had followed him since the day his life had collapsed into a single suitcase and a borrowed couch. Years earlier, Armin had been someone people saluted, someone whose presence meant safety. Those days lived only in the quiet corners of his memory now, buried beneath hospital bills, night shifts, and the constant ache of trying to be enough for a child who deserved so much more. Today was supposed to be simple. A daytime ceremony open to families, a chance for Mireia to see uniforms up close, to feel inspired rather than afraid. He had miscalculated how little grace the world offered men who looked tired and out of place. As the tension snapped tight in those first moments, before anyone could make sense of the scene, we want to pause and reach out to the KindSoul Narratives family. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because stories like this live on the kindness of people who still believe hearts can change. Armin's mind raced as he was guided forward, the sound of polished shoes behind him and murmurs rippling through the gathered crowd. He felt exposed, every flaw magnified under the high ceilings and bright lights. His daughter's absence was a physical pain now, his hand still curved as if holding hers. He wanted to explain, to justify his presence, but years of being dismissed had taught him that explanations rarely mattered when people had already decided who you were. The security detail moved with the confidence of those who believed they were preventing a threat, not tearing a family apart. Across the hall, banners commemorated service and sacrifice, sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting long, solemn shadows. Faces turned, curiosity mixing with suspicion. Armin's breath came shallow as memories flooded back of another life, another uniform, another day when everything had gone wrong. He remembered the explosion that changed the course of his existence, the long months of recovery, the quiet discharge paperwork slid across a desk with polite regret. He remembered the night Mireia's mother packed her things, unable to carry the weight of a future built on uncertainty and pain. Since then, every step forward had felt like pushing against a tide determined to pull him under. What Armin did not see at first was the woman moving quickly through the crowd, her posture straight, her eyes sharp with recognition rather than suspicion. Alina Cade had grown up in halls like this, had learned early how to read the subtle shifts in power and emotion that filled a room before words ever did. As the daughter of a decorated general, she had spent her life surrounded by ceremony and control, but she had chosen her own path within it, driven by a quiet determination to protect what truly mattered. The moment her gaze landed on Armin, something in her expression changed, a flicker of disbelief followed by certainty. Alina's childhood had been shaped by stories of courage told at dinner tables and bedtime alike, but one story had stood apart. It was the story of a man who had carried her father out of chaos years ago, shielding him at great personal cost. She had been young then, watching from a distance as adults whispered about bravery and sacrifice. The face before her now, older and worn but unmistakable, matched the memory etched into her mind. The world seemed to slow as realization set in, the polished hall suddenly charged with an unspoken truth that demanded to be acknowledged. Armin felt a shift before he understood it, the pressure on his arm easing slightly as attention diverted elsewhere. He was trembling now, the adrenaline giving way to exhaustion and shame. All he wanted was his daughter back in his arms, her familiar weight grounding him. He wondered what lesson she would carry from this moment, whether she would learn that public spaces were places of fear, or whether somehow this could still become something different. The weight of that possibility pressed on him harder than the hands ever had. Alina stepped forward, her presence commanding without aggression, and the air seemed to change. People leaned in, sensing that something important was unfolding beneath the surface of confusion. She looked at Armin not with suspicion but with recognition and respect, emotions rarely directed his way anymore. In her eyes, he was not a man being escorted out, but a piece of history walking unnoticed through the present. The security team hesitated, training colliding with uncertainty, as Alina's certainty filled the space between them. As the truth surfaced, rippling outward through the crowd, Armin felt his knees weaken. Years of invisibility cracked open under the sudden light of acknowledgement. He thought of all the mornings he had woken before dawn to work jobs that barely covered rent, of nights spent pretending not to be afraid while Mireia slept beside him. He had never expected recognition, never sought it. He had only wanted to survive quietly, to raise his daughter with as much love as his battered heart could manage. The general himself stood among the assembled officials, his posture rigid with age and authority, but his eyes softened as he took in the scene. Recognition dawned there too, followed by something like remorse. The distance between who Armin had been and who he was now collapsed in that shared look, years folding into a single moment heavy with unspoken gratitude. The hall, once cold and intimidating, seemed to warm under the weight of collective realization. Mireia, who had been guided gently aside, watched with wide eyes as the adults around her shifted in tone and stance. She did not understand titles or history, but she understood when the world stopped feeling dangerous. When she was returned to her father, her arms wrapped around his neck with fierce relief, and Armin held her as if he might finally allow himself to breathe. Tears blurred his vision, not of humiliation this time, but of release. The ceremony resumed in a different spirit, sunlight still pouring through the windows, but now it illuminated something fragile and hopeful. Armin stood with his daughter beside him, no longer hidden, no longer alone. Alina watched them quietly, aware that the true victory was not in recognition or apology, but in the restoration of dignity to someone who had nearly lost faith in it. The general approached later, his presence heavy with words he struggled to express, but even without them, the acknowledgement was clear. Near the end of this journey, if this story has touched your heart, we ask you to support it in whatever way you can. Your belief in compassion keeps stories like this alive and reminds the world that kindness still matters. Before we reach the final moment, take a second to comment below and share what this story made you feel, because your voice is part of its meaning. As the afternoon light softened and the crowd slowly dispersed, Armin and Mireia stepped back into the open air together. The building behind them no longer felt like a place of judgment, but a reminder that the past does not disappear simply because it is inconvenient. Sometimes it waits for the right moment, the right person, to bring it back into the light. Armin looked down at his daughter, her face turned up toward the sky, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It was not the sharp ache of survival or the dull weight of regret, but a quiet, steady hope. In that moment, he understood that being seen, truly seen, could change the course of a life, and that even after everything he had lost, the world still held room for grace, second chances, and a future shaped by love rather than fear.